Set our alarms to that music. That's what happens. Anyway, we are back here in Las Vegas, and it's time for the second part of our town hall. Please join us in welcoming former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to the stage.
It's good to see you, Secretary.
It's great to see you, too.
Thanks.
Welcome, welcome. So,
thank you.
We're going to do what we did with Senator Sanders. We begin with just a few questions from us, and then you get to get rid of us and get to the real people, I promise. As you know, President Obama now says he regrets voting to filibuster Justice Alito's nomination. To quote the White House this week, quote, throwing sand in the gears of the confirmation process was a regret. You joined 24 other Democrats when you were in the Senate to filibuster Alito's nomination. You ultimately voted against actually both Alito and Justice Roberts. Do you also regret that? Considering the situation we're in now, do you wish that you, like now I think President Obama, feels as if, boy, wish I didn't have that vote. Wish I hadn't participated in something like that.
Well, the way I look at it is this. I did oppose Justice Alito and, as you say, Chief Justice Roberts, because after meeting with them, listening to them, I did not believe that their judicial philosophy and approach was one that would be the best for the country. So I spoke against him. I voted against him. But we had a process. You know, the nomination was made, and we went through the process. And what the Republicans today are saying is you can't vote on anything. We don't want the president to send us a nominee. I think that is very different. And what I am saying is, number one, the president has the right and obligation under the Constitution to send forth a nominee, and the Senate has an obligation under the Constitution to decide whether to approve or not. That's very different than on the floor of the Senate making your argument.
But a filibuster, if you had been successful, then Judge Alito would not have gotten a vote on the floor of the Senate.
That's the way the Senate operates. You know, you get to have a vote. You get to use the rules. And Harry Reid's sitting here. He's an expert on the rules, a master on the rules. You get to use the rules. That happens a lot. And so, you know, I'm not in the position that the president is right now, trying to talk some sense into the Senate Republicans to actually do their constitutional duty. But once a nominee goes to the Senate, then you go through the process. There should be hearings, both from the nominee and other witnesses. Then it should be presented to the floor, and then you use the procedures that are available. And eventually, as you know, Justice Alito was confirmed.
Right. All right, let me move to another question. Some of your lines of attack against Senator Sanders in this campaign sound familiar. And as we did with Senator Sanders, we have a little clip we want to play. Take a listen.
You are not going to wave a magic wand and have the special interest disappear.
I wish that we could elect a Democratic president who could wave a magic wand and say, we shall do this and we shall do that. That ain't the real world we're living in.
All right, first clip was from a month ago. Second clip was from 8 years ago.
Right.
Many Democratic voters obviously didn't believe your criticism 8 years ago was fair. Why should they believe that the criticism you're making of Senator Sanders isn't just as unfair as they thought it was 8 years ago?
You know, I think that it's important for Democratic voters to take a hard look at all the candidates, and in this case, obviously, Senator Sanders and myself, and to evaluate who's got the best plans, who's got the most experience, who's ready to do all parts of the job on day one, not only being president, but being commander-in-chief. And I think it's fair for voters to also take a hard look about where we are and what we need to accomplish in order to have the kind of progress that I'm advocating. I am a progressive who likes to make progress, and I know how hard it is. So I don't want to make promises I can't keep. I don't want to tell people something that's not on the level. I want people to actually hold me accountable for what I say and what I present. And then, they get to make their decision. So we'll see what happens.
So this magic wand, they should not discount your criticism this time, even if they did 8 years ago.
I have a number of differences with Senator Sanders, and we've been laying those out in the campaign, and we're going to continue to do that.
All right, go ahead.
Secretary Clinton, a federal judge this week ordered Apple to disable the privacy feature in the iPhone used by one of the San Bernardino terrorists so law enforcement can access the data. Apple CEO Tim Cook is pledging to fight it, calling it a dangerous precedent and saying the government is asking Apple to hack our own users. What do you think is right here?
Look, I think, Jose, this is one of the most difficult dilemmas that we're faced with. Of course, law enforcement has every reason to want to get information off of a killer's cell phone. One of the San Bernardino killer's cell phones that they can't open. They're asking for help. Apple, understandably, is worried about opening the door, creating what they call a backdoor into encryption that would not just have to field requests from the United States government, but from the Chinese, Russian, Iranian governments. This is a very hard dilemma. And what I keep calling for is to try to get the government and our great tech companies to figure out what is the path forward, because I don't know what this judge is going to do in this case. I assume that it'll be appealed. It's going to have lots of ramifications. But I see both sides, and I think most citizens see both sides. We don't want privacy and encryption, destroyed, and we want to catch and make sure there's nobody else out there whose information is on that cell phone of the killer. So this is why you need people in office who can try to bring folks together to find some common ground. That is exactly what I would do. And I'm well aware that the government has its needs. Obviously, Apple and the other tech companies are concerned about this. But as smart as we are, there's got to be some way, on a very specific basis, we could try to help get information around crimes and terrorism.
The problem is that if you open up that back door that doesn't exist right now, as you said, the United States is looking for information from a cell phone that was used by a terrorist. But does China have the same intention?
Well,
and does Russia? And does Cuba? And does North Korea?
Well, Jose, that's why I said it's a dilemma.
Right, so
it's a legitimate dilemma. I am not a tax expert. I'm not, I'm not telling you what can or should be done. I'm just describing to you the very difficult dilemma that we are caught in, and really making a plea that the government and the tech companies keep working together to see if there isn't some legitimate way to help deal with these kinds of very real world problems that we face.
Secretary, on his plane flight here, Senator Sanders attacked your husband's legacy, and I'm going to quote. He said, Bill Clinton was the president who led the effort to deregulate Wall Street, was the president who fought for the disastrous NAFTA trade agreement, was the president who pushed this so-called welfare reform, which was absolutely disastrous for low-income people. Should you be held accountable for your husband's?
Well, he was the president who created 23 million jobs, who raised incomes for every group in America, not just those at the top. In fact, African-American families, Latino families had an even higher than average increase in income, created some great economic development programs like, the empowerment zones and the new market tax credits. So, I know that Senator Sanders has also attacked President Obama. He's called him weak. He's called him disappointing. He tried to get somebody to run against him in the 2012 election in the primary. And, I just don't know where all this comes from, because maybe it's that Senator Sanders wasn't really a Democrat until he decided to run for president. He doesn't even know what the, last two Democratic presidents did. And well, it's true. It's true. It's true. I mean, it happens to be true. And I got to tell you, I look at our last two Democratic presidents. Were they perfect? No. No person is. But I'll tell you what, I would take the two of them over any Republican, anytime, anywhere.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I think we should hear from the people. And by the way, You both have been booed at some time,
Yeah.
so we actually have we can tell this is a competitive race at this point. All right, we're going to open
That's
the
good.
questions
We like a good
back
contest.
up to the audience.
We also like the facts. The facts are our friends, so let's talk about them.
Fair enough. Well, Madam Secretary, we're going to go and start with the same issue that we started with Senator Sanders, and it's the issue of immigration. As you know, Nevada is almost 28% Hispanic, and Latinos are the fastest growing group in the state. People here are concerned with legal immigration, the ability to work in this country, and reforming the current system, to name just a few things. So I'm going to turn it over to Alan Aleman here. He's going to ask a question about how a Clinton administration would deal with immigration reform.
Hi,
Mr.
Mrs.
Aleman.
Clinton. In 2007, you opposed giving driver's license to undocumented people. Why?
Well, back then, it was a state-by-state determination, and I'm happy that most states have understood and moved in the right direction. But what we've got to do now is get to comprehensive immigration reform with a path to citizenship. And I understand that somebody asked Senator Sanders a question because her husband was in Mexico. I don't know who asked that question. And I want to tell you, I will end the 3- and 10-year bar provision so that you do not have to face that ever again.
Madam Secretary, let me follow up on something. I've asked you a few times about the prioritization of immigration reform.
Right.
And when I've asked you about your first 100 days priorities, you've mentioned a lot of issues, and you haven't put immigration reform first. And some immigration reform advocates are concerned that if you don't put it first, that the same thing that happened in 07, the same thing in 10, how do you prevent that if you don't make it first? As you know, these legislative lifts are hard. And the concern is if it's not first, it may not happen.
Well, when we both had a chance to vote on comprehensive immigration reform in 2007, the bill that Senator Ted Kennedy championed, I voted for it. Senator Sanders voted against it. So I know how important it is to put together a coalition. If I'm fortunate enough to get the Democratic nomination, I will immediately begin working on the priority legislation that I want the Congress to deal with right away, and immigration reform will be among those issues. Now, for me, the way the Congress works, and I think my friend Congresswoman Marcia Fudge is here somewhere, and there she is, thank you. The way that the Congress works, there are a bunch of committees, and the committees have different jurisdiction. So if you're dealing with immigration reform, you go to one committee. If you're dealing with equal pay for women, you go to a different committee. So what I want to do is get my priority legislation ready to go, begin working even with Democrats in the Congress during the general election. I also want to do that for nominations, because I want to get the judges I want to appoint. I want to get the other important officials appointed. So I'm not going to waste a minute. That's why I want to get this nomination as quickly as possible so I can get to work on being their president.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Jose.
Secretary Clinton, just very quickly, how would you go about cutting out those 3- and 10-year proposals? How would you do that? And how long would it take you to do?
And I'm so sorry about that. And you know what? It does have to be done legislatively. I would do it on two paths. I would do it on a separate piece of legislation and part of comprehensive immigration reform. But we've got to get rid of it because, you know, I met a young dreamer. She was brought here when she was 7 months old. She has a younger sister who's a citizen. Her father is a legal resident. Her mother is undocumented. Her mother cannot leave their family for 3 or 10 years to go back to where she came from, leaving her family and her daughters alone to wait until she can get in line to be able to come back. It makes no sense. It breaks up families. It is burdensome. We're going to end it. And I'm going to do everything I can to get it ended as soon as possible.
Secretary Clinton, one quick follow-up to Chuck's. Usted se compromete, do you promise to deal with immigration reform within the first 100 days?
Absolutely. And we're going to introduce legislation, Jose. We are absolutely going to introduce legislation. I'm going to call everybody on the committee, Democrats and Republicans alike.
Within
Harry.
100 days?
Yeah, I'm going to introduce my priority legislation, and this is at the top of that list. It's going to be introduced, and then I'm going to work as hard as I can to make sure that we get it moved through the congressional process. I can control the introduction of legislation, but the Congress has to get its act in gear. That's why we need to elect a Democratic Senate, so we've got some friends, and we got one House that will actually move the legislation.
Secretary, say hello to Rocio Puente. She speaks both English and Spanish. A little bit more comfortable in Spanish, she tells me, so I'm going to translate for her. She wants to ask you about DACA, the president's executive action that gives children brought here illegally through no fault of their own, their parents' temporary legal status. Rocio, muy buenas noches.
Buenas noches. ¿Cómo usted haría posible que los estudiantes que reciben DACA se puedan convertir en residentes permanentes? Ellos viven con mucho temor cuando tienen que renovar su tarjeta cada 2 años.
Tiene toda la razón. Mrs. Clinton, what would you do to make possible that the DACA students become permanent residents? You know, they live with a lot of fear because they have to renew their permits every 2 years, and that is a terrifying prospect for them.
Right. Well, that's why I support the president's executive orders on DACA and DAPA, and I will do everything I can to make sure that they are kept in place. As you know, there's a court action challenging them. I don't know what's going to happen now because of the Supreme Court situation, but I will renew them. I will go further if it's at all legally possible, and I will make this a big political issue because we need to keep those young people working, going to school, being productive members of our society. So I have to tell you, I will do what I can as president. I'm hoping if we win back the Senate and we win the White House again, the Republicans are going to see the error of their ways and quit using immigrants to divide our country and quit taking the kind of mean-spirited actions that they do. You know, I was the first person to call out Donald Trump. I said, basta, enough of this prejudice and paranoia and the kind of language that he uses. So I will do everything I can, not only for the young people who deserve the highest protection, but for their families as well.
Gracias, Rocio. Secretary, if I could, in the summer of 2014, you said undocumented children from Central America should be sent back as soon as it can be determined who responsible adults in their family are, a position you've been defended by saying we had to send a message to families and communities in Central America not to send their children here. As far from the message Pope Francis had yesterday, he criticized leaders on both sides of the border, calling migrants cannon fodder and their treatment a human tragedy. Do you still believe that you held that position, and is that a right position?
Well, first, let me really express my deep appreciation to Pope Francis. He has talked about immigrants and migrants everywhere in the world. He came to our border to talk about it again. And I really appreciate him doing that because I hope people will begin to understand that we've got to show our values. We need to provide humane treatment. So here's what I believe. Number one, we need to end family detention. I've been saying that for a very long time. We need to close the private family detention centers that are making a profit off of housing family members. We need to make sure that every child has due process and is guaranteed counsel. I have advocated that. Again, I thank Senator Reid because he now has introduced legislation to make that the law. So there is a process. We have to follow the process. But at the same time, we don't want children being handled by smugglers and traffickers, often being abused and mistreated. So there is a way where we need to take care of and provide total legal due process, including counsel to children who get here. But we need to do more to help families back in Central America have a better life, get rid of the violence that stalks them so that they don't live in fear.
But should those children be a message?
Well, the children themselves need to be taken care of. They are children. They should be given every help that we can, and I think we're doing a better job of that than we were.
Chuck?
All right, thank you. Our next question comes from Joe Sacco. He's a realtor here. He is a Sanders supporter. Mr. Sacco, go ahead with your question.
Secretary Clinton, as a realtor here in Nevada, I know personally how important the economy and the housing market is to the stability of our great nation. As the Democratic presidential candidate who has delivered speeches to the largest U.S. financial institution in exchange for hundreds of thousands of dollars in speaking fees, why are you hesitant to release transcripts or audio-video recordings of those meetings in order to be transparent with the American people regarding the promises and assurances that you have made to the big banks?
Well, let me say this. I am happy to release anything I have when everybody else does the same, because every other candidate in this race has given speeches to private groups, including Senator Sanders. But let me get to the heart of your question. I was the candidate who went to Wall Street before the crash. I was the candidate who went to them and said, you are wrecking our economy. What you are doing with mortgages is going to bring us down. I called to end the carried interest loophole for hedge fund managers. I called to rein in CEO pay. I now have the most effective and comprehensive plan to deal with the threats that Wall Street poses. And I go further than Senator Sanders does, because I want to go after all the other bad actors. The bad actors like hedge funds, the bad actors like AIG, the insurance company, like Countrywide Mortgage. I take a backseat to nobody in being very clear about what I will do to make sure Wall Street never crashes Main Street again. And that you can count on.
Secretary Clinton, I do respect you very much. In fact, only a decade ago, I was a very, very big supporter of yourself and your husband. It actually broke my heart when you said marriage was between a man and a woman. How can we trust that this isn't just more political rhetoric? Please just release those transcripts so that we know exactly where you stand.
Well, you know where I stand because I've been in public standing there the whole time. But let me say something about this. You know, I, like many Americans, have evolved, and I'm glad I have. I am a 100% supporter. Adamant about protecting marriage equality. And I think it's significant that the Human Rights Campaign, the leading organization in our country to ensure that the LGBT community has the rights they deserve, have endorsed me. Now, your candidate said, well, that's because they're a member of the establishment. Well, with all due respect, they fight against the establishment every single day. And I've been with them for years, and I will pass the Equality Act, too. Another one of my friends, Congresswoman Titus. Thank you for being here.
All right. Secretary Clinton, we're going to talk about housing. You brought it up. It's been brought up. It's a big problem here in Nevada. This was the top state in the country for foreclosures during the crisis. Francisco Morales here has a question for you.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank you for your lifelong commitment to the Democratic Party and comprehensive immigration reform.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
But as you know, for many Hispanics, achieving homeownership is synonymous to achieving the American dream. Yet many of our families were hit particularly hard during the Great Recession and housing bust. What would a Clinton administration do to ease the fears of homeownership among our community?
Well, I know how hard hit Nevada was. I think the highest rate of foreclosures. You still have a lot of houses underwater, meaning that, you know, the value is not equal to what you had to pay for it and what the mortgage principal and interest are. I take that very seriously. So here's what I want to do. I want us to move in any way we can to the federal government to help relieve the burden of already existing homeowners. I don't want the kind of wave of foreclosures that struck this state ever again to happen. Secondly, we want to provide more help so that more homeowners, Hispanic homeowners, African-American homeowners, those who want to be, have access to better credit and better support. You know, credit has tightened up in ways that are just not fair. You know, you are 3 times more likely to be able to get a mortgage if you're a white applicant than if you're black or Hispanic, even if you have the same credentials and you're presenting it to the people who are looking at it. That has to end. I will go after that kind of discrimination and bigotry with everything I've got, using every housing authority, the Justice Department, the U.S. Attorney. We're not going to have this kind of bigotry. You know, I'm running to knock down all the barriers that stand in the way of people getting ahead. So we're going to make that possible. And of course, we got to get incomes up so you have more of a chance to save for that down payment. And you've got a better chance to actually get in a home and stay there. So I'm going to use every tool at my disposal to make that dream a reality again.
I actually purchased a home 6 months ago, and I can relate because the amount of hoops that I had to jump as a 24-year-old Hispanic were just unprecedented. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
And I'm telling you, if you were not a Hispanic, you would not have had as many hoops. That has to end. It's not right and fair to you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Secretary Clinton. Gustavo Ramos is retired, and he has a question about Social Security. Gustavo, buenas noches.
Buenas noches.
Muchas gracias. Gusto verte.
Good evening, Secretary. How are you? My question has to do with Social Security. Hardworking people pay into Social Security with hope and anticipation that in the future they will receive the benefit of their labor and monetary investment. Social Security needs a 21st century update to keep it financially sound for future generations. This will take presidential leadership. What is your specific plan to address this issue for the many who need it for economic survival?
So important. And the first thing we have to do is prevent the Republicans ever from privatizing it. They are still determined to privatize Social Security. You know, Harry remembers after Bush got reelected in 2004, the first thing he said was, let's go privatize Social Security. I was one of the leaders in the Senate with Harry and others. We went around the country. We made it clear we would never let that happen. And you know what their whole plan was? Their plan was to give the Social Security Trust Fund to Wall Street. Imagine that. If you thought we had scandals and collapse before, think of that. That will never happen on my watch. But here's what will happen. We need to get more money into the Social Security Trust Fund to keep it solvent far into the future. There's a couple of different ways I'm looking at, and I'll have to talk with the Congress to try to figure out what's the best way forward. We can raise the cap and get more money that way. We can go after with the existing percentage that comes out of people's paychecks. We can go after what's called passive income, so that rich people have to pay on all their income, not just their, earned income, because frankly, they live mostly off of, as you know, capital gains and investment income. So we're going to come up with the best plan to do that. But here's what else I want you to know. We have too many Social Security recipients right now who are barely making it. And that's largely because, number one, they were low-wage workers during their lifetime. They didn't put that much into the fund, so now when they need it, they're capped out. They don't get what they need to live on. We also have a problem of older women who may not have worked at all during their lifetimes. They took care of their homes and their families. They contributed to their communities. So they don't have much to draw on either. And then one of the saddest problems I'm going to go after is what happens when a husband dies and then a widow loses half of her Social Security payment. If she's not making much to begin with, I've met a lot of these women. They're losing their homes. They are just really in financial distress. So we're going to get it more solvent, and we're going to fix some of the problems of the people who are most in need. And that's what I'll do as president.
Secretary, among those different issues that you mentioned, as you know, people pay Social Security taxes on income about to $120,000. Senator Sanders wants to change that. You were opposed to raising the cap in 2008. This time around, you seem to be considering it.
Yes.
But you haven't come out one way or the other. So should people start paying Social Security taxes on income over $120,000?
That's one of the options, Jose. That's why
right,
I
but
said
it's 120, 150, 200.
Yeah.
Do you have
well,
any?
it could be over 250. It could be from 120 up. It could be at a higher amount. But this is the kind of issue that you've got to try to figure out where the Congress might be. So I've laid out a number of different approaches to get the money. And the other one that I mentioned to the gentleman is putting the percentage on passive income, so that people with a lot of income, but from capital gains and from investments, who now, they don't pay much into Social Security, but they have a lot of money, they will have to pay more. So those are a couple of the options. I think we could pick one or more of those, but the goal is to get more money into the trust fund.
Chuck, all right. Would you ever imagine raising the retirement age in the next 10 years?
No, and I'll tell you why, Chuck. No.
Okay.
I'll tell you why. Right now, if you look at who draws Social Security for the longest time, people who have worked hard for many years, people who are often really broken down by the physical labor or the repetitive labor that they've done, their lifespan is much lower than the lifespan of people like you and me, who had a different sort of life, made our monies different ways, didn't have to work that hard. So right now, the average death age for a lot of Americans and Latinos and African Americans is lower than the average death age of whites, and that's lower still than the age of people who are affluent and well-educated. So raising the retirement age would very well eliminate a lot of hardworking people from getting much Social Security at all. I will not do that.
Okay.
I want people to have the best possible older years, so that is ruled out for me.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We're going to sneak a break in here, and when we come back, a lot more issues, and you'll hear from a lot more folks. Thank you. Welcome back to the MSNBC and Telemundo Clinton-Sanders Town Hall, just 2 days before Nevada Democrats go and caucus. Our next question. Secretary Clinton, it's been no secret that many Democratic voters who are considering voting for you or for Senator Sanders are worried about some questions of trust. Our next question has to do with that, and it comes from Tiana Winters, who, by the way, supports you. Go ahead.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Tiana Winters. I attend UNLV. I'm a senior. And
Running Rebels.
very exciting.
Let's go Running Rebs.
I'm representing the Greenspun College of Urban Affairs. My question tonight is, my generation is the generation that grew out of that economic downturn.
Yes.
Gone are the days of affordable tuition, booming job market, and attaining that classic American dream.
Right.
We need a rebel. We need somebody who's going to be by our side and ensure that after working hard and putting in our time, that we will be able to attain that success. My question to you is, because my generation is a little wary of placing another politician in the White House, with your tenure in politics, how are you going to deserve our vote?
Well, first of all, I know that you think, with good cause, everything is messed up, because that has been your personal experience. I have the deepest, respect for and feeling for young people who literally came out of the Great Recession ready to get on with their lives and are finding barriers everywhere they turn. I believe with all my heart that I'm the best person to be the president who will deliver for you. I've actually been in elective office shorter period than Senator Sanders, who's been in the Congress 25 years. I've been there for 8, but I've also been a Secretary of State, and I was a very big activist my entire life. And I know what has to be done, and I will do it. That's why I've laid out plans to remove the economic barriers that stand in the way of young people. I want to stop bad actors from doing bad things. There's no disagreement there. But I want to make some good things happen. I want to get back to the kind of job creation we had when my husband was president and get incomes rising, because Americans haven't had a rise in 15 years. I want to be sure that we knock down the barriers that hold back people because of racism, sexism, homophobia, all the other kinds of prejudice and bias that is out there. I also want to be sure women get equal pay for work. I think it's way past time, and we deserve it. And I have a very specific plan to make college affordable, and I also have a really aggressive plan to get student debt down, to enable you to repay, refinance at a much lower cost, and be able to get out of it sooner. So you're not paying your student debts 30 years from now. That's ridiculous. I didn't have to do that. I had student debt, and I got it paid back within about 15 years because I had it at a reasonable amount. And I want to move more young people into what are called contingency repayment plans. That's a mouthful, but it basically means you pay as a percentage of what you earn, not a fixed interest rate. I want to triple the number of national service jobs. I want to double the amount of education grants that go to people who do national service. So I have a comprehensive plan. And I think it's really important for young people to understand, yeah, you know what? We've got to have big, bold plans. We've got to have our ideals and our values. And then we got to figure out, okay, How are we going to get it done?
Right.
How are we going to make it happen? I am absolutely confident I can do that. That's why I'm asking for your vote and your support.
Thank you.
Madam Secretary, you probably saw the exit polls. What about this trust deficit?
I couldn't hear you,
I'm
Chuck.
sorry. This issue, to be a successful president, you're going to have to erase this trust deficit that you're dealing with right now. You saw it out of New Hampshire. How do you deal with it?
Well, look, you know, I've won one, he's won one, we've got 48 to go. And that's why we're here in Nevada, working as hard as we can. And then on to South Carolina and all the other states that come after. You know, look, I am absolutely focused on delivering results for people, and any fair reading of what I've done since I went to work as a young lawyer for the Children's Defense Fund up till today shows that I know how to do that. It is obviously troubling that people have questions about me, which I will do my best to answer. But I think they really come down to saying, well, look, you know, like this young woman asked me, you've been around a while. We've seen your face a long time. What does that actually mean? Well, I've been around doing stuff. I've been around getting things that I believe will help people, and that's what I'm going to keep doing. You know, when I ran for the Senate in New York, people said the same thing. You know, we can't trust her, we don't know her. I won. And then when I ran again 6 years later, I was reelected with an even larger percentage of the vote because people saw me in action. So people are really asking, is she in it for herself or is she in it for me? I've always been somebody who believed and raised in my family and my faith that I, with my blessings, had an opportunity and obligation to do what I could to help others, and that's what I will do as president.
All right, thank you, Madam Secretary. We have a run on running rebels when it comes to our questions. So our next question comes from Adriana Guizar Vasquez. Adriana.
Hi, good evening. My question is exactly on your debt-free college proposal. Will your debt-free college proposal give the same opportunities to Latinos and DACA students as Senator Sanders' tuition-free proposal?
I will do everything I can to make sure that it does. And, you know, I want to make that possible. I hope I can do it without legislative action, but I might not be able to, and he may not be able to. So that's why comprehensive immigration reform is so important, because that would clear all this up. So I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that the young people I met, you know, I met a young woman who wants to be a doctor. She came here as a child, undocumented. She's at the top of her class here in Las Vegas. She's worried. Can she get into school being undocumented? Can she get the scholarship she and her family would need? Can she graduate and go to medical school? And when she gets her medical degree, can she get a license? I'm telling you, that is just heartbreaking to me. So I'm going to do everything I can to clear all the barriers away so that every young person in this country has the same chance to make a contribution as that young woman wants to make.
So, based on the proposal that you have right now, with this, for example, the AmeriCorps grants that you're willing to give to students, how would those also be granted to DACA students, for example?
Yes. Yeah, and you know, I think both Senator Sanders and I are seeking the same goal, to make college affordable for everybody. I believe my plan is a better way to get it done, and therefore I'm standing behind it. And I am strongly in favor of clearing away all these barriers. So yes, anything I can do to make sure every single young person who wants to go to college in this country is given the chance to do it. It's also why I want to make community college free. Because if community college is free, then a lot of young people can actually go to community college without a lot of the assistance that they might need for a four-year college or university.
Thank you.
The caucus cough, we know that well.
Yeah.
What? Oh, yes, the cough. Secretary, a quick follow-up on that, and I know it's a state's issue, but driver's license for the undocumented. Do you foresee a time when the federal government would be able to include the undocumented in federal grants for education, for example? Because if the state doesn't do it, it doesn't mean that they don't have those dreams and aspirations that they can't reach because in Washington they decide that they're not equal.
Absolutely true, Jose. And I'm very proud of all the states that have taken steps to make sure that grants and college tuition and other things are taken care of for dreamers, for others who are undocumented. But it should be a national priority. And that's another element of comprehensive immigration reform, because once we get that, then there are no more questions. Everybody is entitled to the same rights and benefits. You know, I'm not sure everybody in the audience even knows. I mean, every year, undocumented workers contribute $12 billion to the Social Security Trust Fund. And the best estimate is that under comprehensive immigration reform, that amount would go up to 20. It would be an additional $20 billion every year. So you talk about making the Social Security Trust Fund solvent, getting people out of the shadows, getting them into the economy to be able to pursue their dreams helps all of us. So absolutely, we're gonna head for that.
Y como dice Luz, dinero que contribuyen y nunca ven. As Luz says, money they contribute and never see anything back from.
That's right. They contribute for everybody else. Like the gentleman's question, I want you to be able to contribute and as a citizen be able to draw it down because it's yours.
Secretary, say hello to Andres Felipe Rivero. He has a question about labor unions, right?
Right.
Yes.
¿Cómo estás?
Muy bien, gracias. Good evening, Secretary Clinton. Your ties to corporate America have been at the center of this campaign. As President of the United States and former board member of the board of directors of Walmart, will you be silent on Walmart's anti-union campaign? But more importantly, will you propose legislation that protects the right of workers to organize in their workplace?
Well, can I tell you, the answer to that is yes. And it's why all the unions have endorsed me. And I want to tell you, including the commercial workers union, that is at the forefront of the organizing campaign at Walmart. But most of the other unions have public unions, private sector unions, and you know why? I mean, really, here we go. Let's go back to the facts, because I've always been a champion. I've always been there for them. Tom Perez, our great Secretary of Labor, who is here. Where's Tom? Right there. Is somebody who has been on the front line standing up for workers and unions. He endorsed me. He's been campaigning for me. So I know that there's a lot of stuff that is said and thrown around. Look at the facts. Unions have endorsed me because they know I'm on their side. I'm not just showing up at election time telling them what they want to hear. I've been there year in and year out, and I will be as president.
One more question. Will you support a living wage of $15 an hour, which is an issue that is that is at the forefront for working families?
Absolutely. You know, I support a federal minimum wage, and I support states going higher than the federal minimum wage. That's why I support Andrew Cuomo in New York, who wants to raise it to 15. I supported what they did in LA, and I supported what they did in Seattle. But I'm standing with the majority of the Democrats in the Senate who have introduced a minimum wage increase to $12. That would put it at the highest it has been since 1968. That would mean a wage increase for 35 million American workers. And 1 in 4 low-wage workers who are now just barely getting by. And it would help so many women, because the majority of minimum wage workers are women. So I'm absolutely in favor of it. I will do everything that I can. We'll set it because it's a floor, and then I will use the bully pulpit to convince states that believe they can go further to do just that. That's the best way, I think, to get it done.
Madam Secretary, a little subject change here. Let me introduce you to Mary Chapman. Mary has a question on foreign policy.
What strategies do you plan to employ in dealing with the conflicts between women and children's rights versus the practices being utilized by some of our Middle Eastern allies?
Well, you know, I went to Beijing in 1995 and said women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights, and I believe that with all my heart. And when I was Secretary of State, I put women's rights at the center of our foreign policy. And I went to 112 countries for all of you. I raised it in every country. I looked across the table at dictators and authoritarians and chauvinists and sexists and misogynists. Yeah, I did. And I raised it with every one of them. So it will be a huge issue for me. And, you know, I also raised gay rights. I went to Geneva and I made a speech about how gay rights are human rights, because the people who are often the most oppressed and mistreated right now in a lot of countries are LGBT members. So from my perspective, human rights always has to be at the center of who we are as a nation and what I will do as president. You can count on it.
Thank you.
Let me quick follow on foreign policy. President Obama has announced that he's going to go to Cuba.
Yeah.
In March. What has Cuba done to earn a presidential visit? It's one thing to open diplomatic ties, but since December, since the official opening, there have been some regression, particularly in some human rights issues. Is a presidential visit a step too far? Would a President Clinton be going this quickly, rewarding Cuba with a presidential visit this quickly?
Well, I know that the president intends to raise human rights issues. He will be very open about that, I am sure, talking about, you know, the ongoing abuses within Cuba that are visited upon people who are seeking freedom, standing up, speaking out. I think having the president on Cuban soil delivering that message is very powerful. And I'll say, too, Chuck, you know, I was determined as Secretary of State to try to get an opening to Burma, now called Myanmar. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people said, well, you know, that'll never happen. The military dictatorship will never change. And I said, you know what, we got to try. And so I went and I made, you know, the case for why it would be better for them to open, to pursue democracy and freedom. And then I took the president back with me. And the president spoke out. He spoke to a big group of students in Rangoon, Yangon, and said, you deserve better, speak out for it, speak up for it, the United States will support you. Look what's happened. There was an election. Aung San Suu Kyi's party won. The military is turning over power. Now, we can't promise that in everything, but if we don't take reasonable steps, we negotiated a long time to try to get the opening to Cuba. So I think the president's goal is to make it clear to the Cuban people, we're with you today, tomorrow, and into the future. We know you deserve a future of freedom and democracy, and we will be there every step of the way.
Some people worry that you've lost leverage.
What?
That some people worry that the administration's lost leverage on this issue of human rights with the Castro regime.
I think it's a different situation because there's so much traffic now between the United States and Cuba. There are so many Americans, both Cuban Americans and other Americans, coming to, you know, look at new businesses, looking to make alliances with people in their professions or of similar interests. So I think it's not just a presidential visit. It is a punctuation point that makes clear the United States is going to stay with this. We're going to keep pushing. You know, I don't think the Castros can live forever unless they have found, you know, Ponce de Leon's magic water fountain somewhere.
The Secretary.
You know, so there will be a new generation, and we've got to, you know, I want the president to be able to look in the eyes of the new generation, just like we did with the, you know, with the Burmese. We need to say, okay, we're here. What are you going to do for your people? Look how far behind you are. I mean, the economy in Cuba is stuttering because they're not part of the larger world. Let's lift it up and open it up.
Secretaria Clinton, muchísimas gracias por estar con nosotros. Thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Oh my gosh, it's over?
It's already done with this time.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
We would try to go a third hour.
Así llegamos al fin de este programa.